You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic.
I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I'm Matt Gerasimovich.
And today we're covering Part 1, Chapter 53 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, talking about a theme that we've covered a fair bit on this program, but with Grossman you really can't hit it enough, which is about the individuality and the peculiarities of each individual person, this time expressed as Novikov is watching his tankers as they are getting ready to deploy and leave this point where they've garrisoned, as he thinks about the individual characteristics of each one. And yeah, is there anywhere in particular that you would like to begin?
Yes, so there is one part that I really love from this chapter, which is just, and really the kind of the center of the whole chapter, which is just kind of Novikov sort of watching his troops walk down the road. He's just kind of standing there observing them. And it's almost like a painting, because we get kind of uninterrupted access to each of their thoughts. And this almost reminds me of like a Last Supper type painting. There's too many people that are depicted for it to be a Last Supper type painting, but nonetheless, you get the kind of point. And it is just a sort of nice break from the different war scenes, because I feel like war scenes are so focused on the sort of finality of life and totality of death and just what it means to, have a life end and make these great heroic sacrifices and all this stuff. But Grossman wants to take a moment to remind us that before people go into war, there are other things that they think about. They think about dogs wagging their tails, trying to come along with the troops, thinking about eating berries, thinking about fairy tales, thinking about any number of things, bread and sausage, trying to identify the birds in the trees, just all these different things that are happening at these, and not just these moments, but at all of the moments in life. And it doesn't stop just because there's a war. They continue to happen. And so that is kind of, I think, the moral, the lesson from this chapter is that, they're not just fighting for their country or their land or anything kind of large scale political. Of course they are on one side of this, but on the other side, they're fighting as kind of the narrator through Novikov says, the only true and lasting meaning of the struggle for their life lies in the individual, in his modest peculiarities and in his right to these peculiarities. So that's what the fight is about. It is to continue being able to think about birds on trees, bread and sausage, girls, dogs, all of this, to continue living life sort of in a cliche way to the fullest, but sort of to be able to express yourself in or through these peculiarities. It's not just exclusively about that sort of large scale political, though it is important. We shouldn't neglect those particularities, which I think we've talked about plenty before, but yeah, makes another appearance here.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think too, talking about the large scale political, with Grossman, we could also understand fighting for these peculiarities as the connection between the small and the big in terms of political struggle. If we do indeed understand fascism as a force which is attempting to destroy this sort of peculiar humanness and its goal of creating a more controllable, more easily deployed human being, whatever it is. You could see that. And I think, but two, also, I think we may see a jab at some people who are a little bit maybe point to nationalism or point to the Soviet state, whatever, as the sort of the cause that everyone fights for when as he's going on about this right to fight for the peculiars. He thinks his men were timid, gloomy, easily amused, thoughtful, womanizers, harmless egoists, idlers, misers, contemplatives, good sorts. There they were. I like good sorts are separate from the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Contemplatives, and then there are the good sorts. There they all were, going into battle for a common just cause. The simplicity of this truth makes it difficult to talk about. but it is often forgotten by people who should instead take it as their point of departure. I took that at least as a sort of a jab for people who over apply large concepts to the individual rather than thinking that, each person has their own reason for doing what they will. In this case, fighting against the fascist war machine for the right to maintain, their individuality. This could be, a harmless egoist or a good sort.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's I think it's because the sort of large scale change or large scale I don't know, theories are developed from the ground up, so to speak, from the people up and not from the top down. So yeah, it is still there's a constant push and pull, and Grossman's writing it in this book between do we want to explore the sort of large scale aspects of ideology, or do we want to explore sort of bottom up aspects of what it means to be human? And it's very interesting, to say the least.
Right. And I do think this is an important reassertion on all fronts, especially because I think, at least from my perspective, engaging with a lot of World War II media, this doesn't apply when you're in Eastern Europe so much, but that makes sense, especially when you talk about like the Eastern Europe. There's in media, especially as you go away from that era, that tends to portray it as like an alien place where you've got the strange people who are fighting only for the state. And yeah, of course, that was not the case. Certainly, some people may have been, but there's plenty of media that informs, I think, the Western world that tends to portray Eastern Europe as this strange mass that all fought for, the same reasons for state, for Stalin, whatever. And of course, the reality is much more complex than that. Not only by the fact that there wasn't just the Red Army, that there were also partisans of multiple countries, that there were also, the partisans who go on to become Yugoslavia. Not only that there are a multitude of nationalities, not only that there are a multitude of reasons for fighting all of these things, but I think it does get overapplied, and that does create problems. Whereas I'm sure maybe you encounter this a little bit less being around specialists, but being around non-specialists pretty often, that is still how that begins to reflect a worldview of like Eastern European peoples, not just soldiers, as this strange mass who are a sort of hive mind, as if they are somehow different from the rest of us. And so I think these sort of reassertions, maybe less necessarily in the context of Eastern Europe, where Eastern Europeans understand themselves to be individuals, important in this particular context, but as coming in from the outside, an important reminder for everyone looking into.
But yeah, unless you had anything else, I feel like that's a good spot to leave it for this fine day.
I think so. That's all I had to say.
All right. In that case, you will hear from us again soon.